From Gatehouse Media, I'm Dave Morris. Oklahoma is among nearly a dozen states that does not license or regulate the midwives who oversee the majority of out-of-hospital births. Unaccountable is an investigation by Lucille Sherman with Gatehouse Media. And Lucille joins us now. Hi, Lucille. Thank you for your time.
Hey, Dave. Thanks.
Let's back up and dive into this investigation from the beginning here. How did it get started, and why did you start this investigation?
Sure. So last year I was part of a team of people who did a national investigation into the out-of-hospital birth industry. We worked on that investigation for 9 months and published it in November of last year. Some of our findings in that investigation were the fact that out-of-hospital births are more dangerous than mothers realize, and also that midwives are often held unaccountable across the country. As part of that investigation, I actually came to Oklahoma to attend a home birth and started doing some reporting on the scene in Oklahoma while I was there. That was in August of last year, and that sort of, just led to this.
The previous series that Lucille Sherman mentioned is called Failure to Deliver. You can find that on various Gatehouse Media properties. The current series investigation is called Unaccountable. And Lucille, let's dive into some of the investigation and the tools that you have to use to dive into this. This is a deeply personal subject.
Yeah, it was deeply personal. We sort of started by trying to understand what the situation was in Oklahoma. We wanted to know, how safe is this practice in Oklahoma? What's happening in the state? But we quickly found out that there's not a lot of information for us to figure out, how safe or unsafe is this practice in Oklahoma. And so part of what I started doing was looking at social media to understand, how many people were having home births and how many people were experiencing trauma after attempted out-of-hospital births. So that's sort of where I started.
Did you find that people were willing to talk, unwilling to talk, or was this a situation where they're willing to talk but maybe not necessarily on the record?
Yeah, that's a great question. I found especially people who have lost their children recently, this is a really hard subject. Most were unwilling to talk about their experiences. I was able to talk with one mother who lost her son after an attempted out-of-hospital birth in 2016. And as years have gone on, she's sort of had space from what happened and was willing to come forward. But it's been now 3 years since her son died. And she's sort of one of just a handful of mothers who have been willing to talk on the record about this.
Well, certainly our thoughts and condolences to all families who have encountered any sort of loss. But as you learn more about these cases, what have you learned?
Yeah, I've actually found that a lot of these cases were preventable. So it's hard to tell, for sure whether these cases were 100% preventable because we don't have every single medical record. We don't know every single thing that unfolded because in Oklahoma, there's no paper trail. Midwives in other states are required to report their outcomes and are required to report all of their documentation to state agencies. In Oklahoma, they're not. So we found public records to sort of get around that. One thing we relied on was medical examiners' reports. We had many doctors review these cases, and what we found in almost every single case was that these deaths could have been prevented. They were full-term, healthy, well-nourished babies that died during birth.
What have you learned that happened that went from fully healthy to death?
Yeah, so it sort of depends. Usually there are situations that if the families would have been in the hospital when they were delivered, doctors have told us that the baby might have lived. So things that the hospital can see and account for and quickly take the mom in for a C-section or quickly mitigate, whatever the issue is.
We mentioned off the top here that Oklahoma is among various states in the country that does not require license or regulate midwives. Why is that?
That's a great question. Actually, a couple years ago, a state senator named Irvin Yen, now former state senator, tried to pass legislation regulating midwives and out-of-hospital births. And his efforts failed. There was some opposition to his attempts to regulate the practice. And so Oklahoma has remained a state that is unregulated for non-nurse midwives who do handle the majority of out-of-hospital births.
We're chatting here with Lucille Sherman. She has an investigation you can find on the Gatehouse Media properties called Unaccountable. You can go to gatehousenews.com/unaccountable or the Oklahoman's website, oklahoman.com, to read that. And Lucille, in reading through this, you report that midwives, physicians, nurses, and other public officials that have been interviewed, they support legislation regulating out-of-hospital midwives. Is there any sort of movement or change on the horizon?
Yeah, it looks like it, Dave. I've actually spoken with a few legislators who have expressed interest in writing legislation related to this topic. Bill filing for the legislative session isn't until December, so we'll have to see.
One of the other things you can read in this package is a whole Q&A, and you kind of address various points that you touch on in the story or perhaps don't address. So I'll ask you this one, why aren't you including some of the positive sides of home births, because you certainly spoke with people about that as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of my job as an investigative reporter isn't to focus on something that has already been well addressed or something that is good. As investigative reporters, a lot of the time we focus on issues or problems within systems. So that's the thing that we focused on here. We know that home births are a great alternative for some women, but we felt that it was important to explain some of the risks with out-of-hospital births, and especially what the situation is in Oklahoma, so people can make an informed decision if they do choose to have a home birth.
You can get up to speed by reading Lucille Sherman's reporting. Again, the series is called Unaccountable. You can go online at gatehousenews.com/unaccountable or oklahoman.com. Lucille, we certainly appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.